My Inner Knowing, empowering you to find your compass for the journey. We are dedicated to supporting you to rediscover and trust your natural ability to navigate life each day by sharing insight and experience through the lens of two professional communicators and their guests. We intend to prompt internal inquiry that supports all those willing to explore a unique path.
Well, hello.
Hello.
Hello. So today we are visiting with Stephanie Redfeather. I met Stephanie, I think about 10 years ago. I actually don't remember the context. We have a lot of overlapping acquaintances, but something that Stephanie created for me is something that I still use in all of our retreats, in our ceremony. And my dad had found on their land a completely intact, cured turkey wing that was like open. And Stephanie took that and made this beautiful, two actually smudging ones for me. One of them eaten by one of my dogs.
That
the
Layla.
other one.
You smell like turkey, Layla.
That's right. And the other one now protected in my office.
And I've admired it for years.
Yes.
And it's a great story and what a tremendous spiritual guide.
Yeah. More information about Stephanie is in the podcast episode description. And we look forward to sharing this conversation with you today.
Here we go.
Here we go. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you, Stephanie, so much for joining us today. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. Well, I kind of look at my life as an interesting fusion of opposites in a way, because I was a very creative, intuitive child. I went to a performing arts school for any of you who remember the TV show Fame. So, dancing, singing, performing on stage, all of those sorts of things. And then fast forward a few years and I get a degree in applied mathematics from one of the top engineering schools in the country and become an Air Force officer.
Wow.
So I did that for 10 years. And then my spiritual awakening began in earnest when I left the military. And then I stood up my own business, which I've been doing now for 17 years as, a non-traditional spiritual counselor, coach, healer. I'm a high priestess. I'm a shamanic minister. So, any one of these segments in my life, if you compare it to the chunk before that, it's kind of like a complete 180. So, but I've discovered, honestly, that those experiences give me the unique ability to what I call speak both left brain and right brain.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about that. The left brain and the right brain.
Yeah. So I'll frame everything in terms of masculine and feminine archetypes, because that has been a huge component and framework of understanding through my spiritual journey. So when I was in my youth and in that place of creative expression and intuition, those are all very feminine qualities, and we're talking archetypes here, archetypal qualities, which is also associated with the right brain. And then I go into the military. I get a math degree. I'm in an engineering school. This is all very masculine archetypal energies and very left brain. And so when my spiritual awakening began, it was a huge part of it was reclaiming my feminine, that I can look back and almost pinpoint exactly when in my early teenage years, my feminine self started feeling unsafe in the world. And so I think my masculine came in to the best of his ability and said, I'll save you, I'll protect you. And he put her in a box and put her away for safekeeping. And from that point forward, I really started acting and living from my, masculine and left brain energies. And so when my spiritual awakening began, as I was leaving the military, it's been a process of reclaiming the feminine and understanding the divine feminine and the relationship between the masculine and feminine energies, right? The archetypal energies that exist planetarily and that inner sacred marriage, the relationship between my inner feminine and masculine. And so I kind of look at right brain being interchangeable with feminine, left brain being interchangeable with masculine. And so I have lived from both places, and I have done a huge amount of work to integrate both. And so when I say I can speak both left brain and right brain, that's what I mean.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. When we talk about the inner knowing part that one of our guests used, oh man, I can't remember exactly what she said, but something about noticing the subtle. Is that what she said?
Sure.
Yeah. What was that process like for you, as best you're aware?
Yeah. So I'm an empath. It is a huge part of the work that I do in the world. I've written a book and created an oracle deck and, helped a lot of people with that. And so as an empath, I know that in my, the first 3 decades of my life, I felt everybody else's stuff and thought it was my own. I didn't have a strong sense of self. And so a big part of coming to understand my inner knowing has just been coming to locate myself in the first place, to even figure out where my inner knowing resides, because it is common for empaths to place our locus of identity externally, somebody outside of us. It's easy for us to blend and merge, to lose ourselves in relationship. And so for most of us, it takes a lot of work to come back to our own selves, figure out where we end and the next person begins. And so this was a lot of the work of my spiritual awakening, was coming to understand myself as a sensitive soul, and part of it is seated in the work with the feminine energies, because the feminine energy innately understands intuition and listening and receiving. And I had to redevelop those skills and learn to trust myself, because, since my teenage years, when I kind of flipped that switch, I made my decisions very logically and practically. I was also, I have 4 planets in Scorpio, so I have a very strong will. And my MO for a long time was, by God, I'm going to shove that square peg in that round hole. I'm going to make it work. And so in becoming more familiar with and reuniting with the feminine aspect of myself, it helped me learn to live in flow and to trust and to listen to my inner knowing, which was a multi-year process that's frankly still ongoing.
Absolutely.
Of listening, of learning, first of all, identifying that voice, recognizing it, understanding what it sounds like or how it communicates with me. And then, so there's recognizing it, there's hearing it, distinguishing it from other voices or other aspects of the psyche. And then there's actually trusting it and acting on it. And so my experience is that those are skills that need to be developed and practiced, because for most of us, we didn't have the teachers, the mentors, or the community around us to help us develop those skills as a young person.
Oh, absolutely. Can you speak about those steps each? Because I find the process that you're talking about very interesting.
Yeah, you can't act on something that you're not aware of, right? So at least for me, my understanding of my inner knowing means I gotta acknowledge it. I gotta locate it. I have to recognize it for what it is first.
Yeah.
And I think, like so many people, and so many people that I've worked with talk about, I had this feeling, but I just wasn't sure. And I thought this is what I should do, but I didn't trust myself and I wish I would have. So we all have those stories.
Yes.
And so sometimes learning is just a matter of, I'm not going to call it making the wrong choice, but choosing to ignore or not go in the direction of the intuition, watching what unfolds as a result. And then that experience gives you an opportunity to go back and reflect and go, okay, now I know what that feels like inside of my body, or I recognize that specific voice. And in the reflection of what happened, there's an ability to pull from that a knowingness, like, okay, when this happens again, when I hear that voice inside my head or however it presents, it's going to be easier to recognize, right? Because I can say, oh yeah, I remember that time before she showed up and she in my head and said this and I didn't listen and here's what happened. And so there's, that sometimes you just have to bump around in the dark to sort it out and to have enough data points, if you want to call it that, to then string together something you can identify and recognize and go, oh, that was my voice. Okay. the one I just ran over and squashed in the parking lot.
Right.
Oh, that was her, There's also some other things that I have personally developed over time. Part of that has been assisted by, I took Reiki. I'm a Reiki master. I've done a lot of energy work. And so working with energy and subtle energy has helped me pay attention to the physical and physiological signals that my body gives me when something is truth for me. And one of those signals is I will tear up. Like if I'm saying something that's true, like really lands and resonates, I'll choke up. Or if somebody else is saying something and I get that feeling, it has a particular way that it registers in my body that I've come to recognize. And so I think those things exist for everybody too, whether it's getting choked up or getting goosebumps or getting, whatever that thing is. There are our bodies are always communicating. That's my experience.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. I would say we're right there with you about that. Yeah, I know, Walker. How would you describe your body experience?
Oh, when it's right on, I get it goes from the base of my spine up to my skull and back, and just up and down. And I know. But I don't always get that strong of a yes.
Sure. Sometimes it is more
but
subtle.
That's
right. Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm interested, what started that process for you? Did you have a mentor? Was there something you read? What tripped the switch? The change, this 180 degree turn.
Oh my God. So just to be clear, are you talking about when I left the military and had my spiritual awakening?
Yeah, I didn't know if it started before and somehow you started listening or what it was, but.
Right. Yes, I was able to, because my heart had long been banished from the decision-making table, so in my late teens and all through my 20s, it was very practical and logical and all of those sorts of things. But I was getting sort of this inner whisper that it was time to get out of the military. And it wasn't a matter of, hey, I know what I'm going to do next. It's time to get out. It was, hey, it's time to get out. Now what am I going to do?
I hear that.
So I did not have a plan, but I also knew when I went into the military, it was not my intention to stay in for 20 years and make a career of it. It was always, I'm going to stay in as long as it makes sense. And so I wasn't fighting an expectation of, oh no, you got to stay in for 10 more years. And so at the time, my financial advisor, who was with the company that I had been with for 10 years, said, well, Steph, you're really good with people. Have you thought about what you're going to do when you get out? If you'd be great at this. Would you like to go through the process and try? And I was like, well, sure, because I had no other options. And, now I kind of liken it to when you're in grade school and the first time the person of the opposite sex or whatever your persuasion is pays attention to you. And it's like, oh, you like me? Oh, okay, I'll like you back. And so it was like, oh, you think I'll be good at financial planning? Okay, I'll do that.
Yeah.
So there was no soul searching. There was no soul calling. No spiritual process. It was just, yeah, I need a thing to do. You think I'll be good at this? Okay, I'll do this because you think I'll be good at it.
Yeah.
And spent, the last year that I was on active duty preparing. And so as soon as I separated from the military, I jumped right into my financial planning business, thinking that's what I was going to do for the next 5, 10, or 15 years or, next career. And I quit in less than 6 months because I hated it.
Wow.
And I lost $25,000 because I didn't stay in long enough to recoup what I had invested in getting my business stood up.
Yeah.
And that is what really started the dark night of the soul for me.
Okay.
So there were some pre-quake tremors that were happening in the couple of years before that, but that is what really started a period of time that I've called the spiritual crucible, because for about a 5-year period that felt like 100 years, I was just in the crucible getting cooked down and turned into another substance. And it was painful because it was the first time.
Yeah. Wow. It's always so interesting to me what it is that flips the switch for each of us. You just don't know. I mean, we can't predict it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we could see it coming, we'd be like, going the other direction.
I love it. So once you're in the crucible, though, how did you deal with it?
Yeah.
I mean, 5 years seems like, whew.
Yeah. I did not deal with it well because I didn't, again, strong will, fight. What I, for better or for worse, I know how to fight and fight myself. And so what I understand clearly now, because I have studied it and I've been through many shamanic death and rebirth or psychic death and rebirth periods since then, I didn't know what that was. It was my first time. I had no prior experience of a similar thing, at least consciously, not walking through it consciously. I didn't have any tools. This was the beginning of my spiritual awakening. I didn't understand that I was an empath. So I was just, all I knew how to do is drag my heels. And the idea of surrendering, I really had to work on my relationship with that word and come to understand what it really means. There is, I'll give you a funny little anecdote that sort of encapsulates my 5-year experience. I remember coming home. I had been to, I think, an energy share, Reiki share or something, but I was in a really frustrated place and angry and was looking for answers. And, this was a period of time where I'd get an oracle deck and I'd pull a card and I'm like, I don't like this card. And throw the deck down. I don't understand what it's saying. Like a little 5-year-old tantrum. And so I came home and I was so pissed and upset that I was in the kitchen and I kicked off my shoes one at a time, thinking I was going to get that satisfying crash into the wall, at least, with my shoes hitting something. And they both went straight up in the air. And in that house that I don't live in anymore, there are probably still 2 little black smudge marks on the ceiling where I kicked off each of my shoes because I was so pissed. So my time in the crucible was a lot of very ungraceful fighting until finally I started, getting the occasional book having the occasional friend or support structure to just start having a different context, a way to understand what was happening to me and how to move through it. But it took a long time. And even, when that happened 20 plus years ago, there wasn't the books and videos and podcasts and all of the resources that were available like they are now. And so I felt very much like I was bumping around in the dark for a long time.
Yeah. When you did come across a resource that you felt like was helpful to you, what were some of those?
Yes, my mom gave me a book called Excuse Me, Your Life is Waiting by, I think, Lynn Grabhorn. That was pivotal. And then another friend introduced me to the Conversations with God books.
Oh, okay.
And I remember flipping through, because the Conversations with God books was like, I'd read a paragraph and then I'd have to sit back and go, oh my God, oh my God, and then I'd read another paragraph. Oh my God. This is, so reading, especially the first book, was almost like an experience of, I knew it, but I didn't have, I grew up Lutheran, and my journey with understanding who God was inconclusive for a long period of time. I went through, in the Lutheran faith, you go through confirmation in 8th grade. So I was, baptized Lutheran, confirmed Lutheran in 8th grade. And by the time I was in high school, I just felt like I wasn't able to articulate this. I didn't have the languaging or the understanding at all that I do now. But looking back, it's clear that I didn't feel like what I was being told about God was the whole story. But I certainly didn't know how to listen to myself or trust myself. And I didn't know how to get those answers. And so I tried, my best friend was Baptist. So I went to a Baptist church. And, one of my teachers who was a mentor was a Pentecostal. I went to a Pentecostal church. I went, so I was seeking. But by the time I got to college, I just basically kind of put all of that on the back burner. And I'm like, when it's time for me to figure out who God is and my relationship, it'll come to the forefront. And boy, howdy, did it.
Yeah.
But I will share, if I may. There's a quote from the Conversations with God book that I think is really relevant and was so helpful to me. And I'm not going to say it quite as eloquently as he says it in the book, but what God is saying to Neil is basically that people give too much credence to what they are told about God versus their own direct experience of God. And so that has really been kind of the pinnacle teaching for me through all of this is direct experience. What is my experience of a thing? That's how I find out my own truth. That's how I run that experience through my body and extract from it the wisdom and the knowingness in my bones of what is true for me versus just believing it because somebody else said it, or I read it in a book, or I watched it in a video, or I took it in a class. It's like the knowingness, the intelligence, the information becomes wisdom only after it gets run through the body.
How do you, as best you can recall, that process of running it through the body, do you know what it feels like for you when it's not congruent? What does that feel like?
Yeah. And yes, I have developed that again over a lot of years of doing it. But if I feel, basically it's a contractive space. So if I'm feeling collapsed on myself, if I'm feeling tight neck, tight shoulders, tight gut, if my guts are churning, if I'm having tightness in my chest, if I'm feeling anxiety, if my brain is, just feeling discomfort, out of alignment. I mean, those tend to be the signals. And I've learned to distinguish it very, very clearly. And I spent a lot of time and a lot of effort to develop that, because it used to be early on, if something didn't feel right, or if I was angry, or if I didn't agree with a thing, or if I needed to express my own needs, I did not recognize in the moment. I had no idea how to recognize any of those things in the moment. And so they would often come out weeks later, months later, years later.
Yeah.
And so my practice has for the most part gotten me to where the vast majority of the time I can recognize in the moment when I feel those things. And that is so valuable to me. But it has taken a long time to be able to listen to those signals in my body and recognize what they each mean.
Yeah. Was there a particular way you practiced discerning those signals? I know, some people will use like a mindfulness meditation, like a specific, just curious.
Yes, I so appreciate and am inspired by people who can do a thing over and over every day. I'm not built that way.
Yeah.
And I have to recognize that in myself and not make myself wrong for it. And so I'm more, I've never been this is the only way to do a thing kind of person. I am, especially in my teachings and my work with clients, I'm like, let's look at multiple options and go play with them and see what works for you. So I tend to have a pretty big toolbox and I choose what feels right in the moment. So I do have meditation practices I do, but they're not every day and all the time. And I do spend time out in nature. And I do, I'm a mesa carrier in the Pachacuti Mesa tradition of Peru. So I spend time at my altar and do practices there. So it's more of a, what do I need in the moment? What's calling to me? What feels good? And then just time. I know that's a sucky answer because we live in a culture where it's like, give me steps 1 through 5. Just give me the formula. But that is the left brain, and that's how we're indoctrinated, right? That everything is left brain, linear. Just, and if it doesn't work, just do it more and harder. And that's just not, the right brain is the nonlinear spatial place. This is where these processes happen. It's not linear. A does not go to B, does not go to C, does not go to D. It's more like X, butterfly, lightning bolt, Z, Q, plus sign. It's not just non-linear, it's multi-dimensional. But yet what I have found is that in a way that takes the pressure off, because there's no wrong place to start, because everything's connected.
Absolutely.
Tell us about the process of learning surrender.
Ooh, Lordy. Let's see, this was 2005. One of the first mentors that I was introduced to, her name's Carol Rydell, and she was a facilitator of the priestess process, which I am now a facilitator of as well. And so it was a 9-month circle of women's mysteries. And that was the first time that I really had someone to deeply explore all of these principles with. And so I think, without consciously being a gatekeeper for how we build our definition of surrender, I think it gets informed by society, by patriarchal structures, by, Western thought for the most part, which is surrender means you've lost. Surrender means you're giving up. It means you didn't win. And all of these sort of very, kind of battle oriented concepts. But surrendering, what I've come to understand is it doesn't mean I need to fight. It means I need to let go. It means I need to recognize that which is dying. And I can't, that's out of my control, right? So what is dying? Whether that's a belief system or a relationship or a mindset or whatever it is, in that surrendering process, I have discovered that it is much easier to move through it when you can recognize what it is, whose time has come, if that makes sense. That there are things that are trying to complete, and there's a next phase that is trying to get my attention. And if I keep fighting it, I'm just going to prolong it and make it more painful. And so surrendering is a place of acknowledgement of what is, of befriending the experience, because there's medicine in it. If I have the courage to look at what that is and what that means. And, my process of surrendering is much more graceful than it used to be, but I still,
I
there's
love your
still
honesty.
it's
beautiful. It just is truth, right? Yes, it was ugly. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Back in your space.
No, it's okay. It's okay. No, I still have those moments of surrender is the swimming pool, and you're sitting at the edge and you're dipping in your toe and you're like, okay, God, I got my toe wet. Are we good? Can I go back to my life now? And then God just goes, child. And I'm like, all right, fine, splash, but I have to have that moment of testing where I'm like, are you sure? Are we good? I did this a little bit. Is that enough? I got my feet wet. No, you have to go all the way in. But I have the tools now. I have the understanding. I have the paradigm, or maybe that's not the best word. I have the context. I know the subtleties of those realms because I have traveled them at great length consciously now.
Yeah, I think about, the training of our body in that. I think about skill building, but we are really training our body to feel safe enough to go there. That it won't kill us.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because there's what's rational and there's what's irrational. And that's, our fears live in the place of the irrational. So it doesn't matter if our mind, our logic, our left brain can say, you're not going to die. This is, all of the platitudes and all of those. It's like, yes, I recognize that at an intellectual level. I understand. But that is not the end all and be all of the experience. And I think that's where a lot of people stop and make themselves wrong because, well, I'm logicking my way through this. I'm telling myself all of these things. And why don't I feel better? Because that's not all there is to you, right? There's all of the influences of our past. There's all of the unhealed wounds. There's all of the coping mechanisms we've created. There's all of the past life influences and 1,000 other things that make us who we are. And so it's so very true that we have to, if we choose to, don't have to, but there's consequence if we don't. But we will make those decisions when we're ready to go in and feel. That's, for me, where the magic and the healing has been, is transformation is not an intellectual pursuit.
In thinking about that, how do you feel like this work that you stepped into and are still doing have changed the relationships in your life, whether those are, the closest ones, out a few layers?
So the first thing that comes to me in answering that is how I show up differently than I used to.
Mm-hmm.
When again, going back to understanding myself as an empath, in the unconscious years, when I didn't know I was an empath before my spiritual awakening, it was very easy. I was codependent in most of my significant relationships. Easy to lose myself. I'm a recovering people pleaser.
Mm.
And so I had to do a huge amount of work to learn to draw boundaries, to say no, to develop again that inner knowing that we've been talking about, right? Just being able to recognize when my inner self, my higher self, my however you want to describe it, is trying to communicate to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then speak to that, to risk rocking the boat, to risk disappointing someone, to risk having someone else be angry at me. Those were experiences I avoided. As a people pleaser.
Yeah.
I knew how to go in and be what everybody else needed me to be.
Sure.
And I had to learn how to be what I needed me to be, and to be okay with however that was going to land for other people. And that is also still an ongoing process for me.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So much fear can come up around changing relationships, what people's responses will be. It is a very unpredictable, it's a minefield. It is. Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember one of my mentors gave me a very important piece of advice. And she said, it is your responsibility to ask for what you need. And it is nobody's responsibility to give it to you. And so that's a hard one to learn,
Absolutely.
but to recognize that you have to be responsible for your own needs. And if there's something you're asking for in relationship, but you're not getting it, then you have to decide what you're going to do about that. And so, that has been a practice for me in my relationships, to move out of being the people pleaser and acquiescing and doing what will keep the peace, into really listening to myself and not compromising my own inner sovereignty.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking about this class that I took a few weeks ago in nonviolent communication, and so much of, what they talked about wasn't what I thought we were talking about, but it was really, identifying, what need it is that you have. Is it being met or not? And if it's not, then what are you going to do about it?
Right.
And, what I had some awareness of, and I haven't really sat with this since the training, so I know I'll have more clarity. But I do think that I have gotten better at asking for what I need. And I do feel like my needs get met so much more often than they used to. And that doesn't fix everything, but it does bring, for me, a certain groundedness that even if I'm not okay right now, I will be. And I don't know when, and I don't know how, but I will be.
Yeah. And what I hear kind of between your words is, it is a powerful experience of showing up for yourself.
Yes.
When you're able to recognize and ask for what you need, it creates a sense of really feeling and experiencing your own personal power and being able to step out of kind of a victim space or a space of feeling helpless, because you can actually ask and state, recognize and ask and state your needs.
Yes. What are you thinking over there?
Oh, I was just just listening.
Yeah. That asking for needs is a big one. Whew. Yeah. I think it's so difficult for us to do. And I remember the story, younger, like if someone loves you, they know what you need. And
right. The romantic notion
crashed against those rocks.
Right.
Yes, exactly. The romantic notion that sets us all up for disappointment.
Yeah.
And it has taken me some time to recognize that if I ask for something, the delivery of it and the receiving of it is no less meaningful, right? I think there's an expectation of, oh, if you love me or if whatever, then you'll know what I need, and then that has a certain level of meaning and satisfaction when you receive it. But if I have to ask for it, then it's like, wah, wah. Well, now it's not a surprise, and now it's not a whatever. But at least for me, I've come to understand that I can still deeply receive a thing and be grateful for it and be satisfied by it when I asked for it instead of expecting the other person to read my mind.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And that for sure for me was learning, but a powerful one. Yeah. I don't have to be disappointed if somebody doesn't guess accurately. Yeah.
Well, I think it's just interesting you gain power in the asking. And I think you touched on it earlier, even without the receiving piece.
Yeah.
And then you have a decision point.
Right.
Interesting.
Right.
Got my wheels turning here.
Oh, yes. Always so much more to consider.
Well, and something else that just occurs to me that seems relevant in the moment is, with my first husband, I recognize now that I put all my relationship eggs in one basket. And it wasn't right or fair to expect one human to deliver all of my relationship needs, right? We are social creatures, but we have friends, we have peers, we have family, we have acquaintances, we have our spiritual. So, there's so many other ways to receive our relationship needs socially. And so it really, after we got divorced and I was healing and visioning for my future relationship at the time, I realized that I can get a fair number of those needs met not being in romantic relationship. And so that just caused me to go to the next level then of what does romantic relationship hold for me and mean for me. But just the idea that it's not fair to put all of your relationship expectations on one human.
Yeah. Agreed, Stephanie. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie, for your time today. So many things to think about. I will enjoy going back and listening to this again as I work through my process of where I am today.
It's been lovely, and to meet you. I get to see you in person. I've known you just tangentially through your spirit and the smudging wand that you created for Teresa, and it's powerful. It's lovely, and so I was so excited when she was. We were talking about having this conversation with you. Yes. So thank you for sharing.
Absolutely, and thank you. I love having these kinds of conversations.
Yeah. Yay. Well, we look forward to seeing what you create next, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. We are excited to explore life with you. We encourage curiosity, self-growth, and we strive to be more compassionate every day.